So my name is Nick Van Weerdenburg. I'm the founder and CEO of Rangle.io. We are a lean design and development shop based out of Toronto, Canada, and we specialize in building modern web applications in a omnichannel lean manner. And so our topic today will be the secret to fast-tracking e-commerce development the lean startup way. And with me is Mike Costanzo. He's the head of UX and product design at Rangle. And together we're going to walk you through the ideal way to build e-commerce platforms to achieve your customer experience and your sort of growth goals. So what we'll cover in this talk: why fast, lean fashion principles need to be extended to e-commerce. And I think this is a great way to think about it and discuss it within the retail and e-commerce industry. Is the reasons that we do fast fashion are the same reasons that we need to do lean e-commerce. Most features, as a principle, need to go from design to live customer use in less than a month. You can work with a different number depending upon your business, but again, this is really the same concept that you see in fast fashion, where if you're designing something and sourcing something and you're not getting it out to the store, you're losing a tremendous opportunity to learn and to adjust your supply chain and to figure out what your users actually want. Customer experience is the same thing. You can think of your in-store experience as your customer experience in the store, which it is. Why aren't we taking those same approaches to doing e-commerce applications? And the reason is mostly organizational and mostly habit. And we'll talk about ways to move past that, especially with the modern technology stack that's available to us today. Third, how being pixel perfect won't solve your problems and may exasperate them, and why the agency model is broken by the pace of modern retail. You know, we're using the same design process that we used 20 years ago, the same design process that we used for print. We've added UX, we've added other techniques, but fundamentally the way that we go from design to actually being in the store or being in the application is what we need to change. And pixel perfect isn't the way to run a very lean e-commerce or a lean fast fashion practice. And then what's really exciting for the industry is that there's been so many advances over the last 5 years, modern HTML5 being the core thing. It's the platform that's everywhere. It's on your phones, it's on your computers, it's in the kiosks, it's in the in-store displays, it's on people's wrists. This allows you to target everything, and you can do it in a client-centric manner, so you're not always having to update your servers. And so modern HTML5 mobile first and the back-end platform approach enable omnichannel strategies for almost any retailer's e-commerce development. But to leverage that and to achieve your lean sort of process and customer experience, you've got to do it the right way. And you know, as we move further and further into the modern era, digital isn't supporting your user experience, it is your user experience. And that's a key thing. And it's so important that it's really quite stunning that the leading edge practices that we use for getting product into the stores isn't being applied with the same fervor and the same enthusiasm for our e-commerce development. You know, so fast fashion originally was sort of strange. People didn't really get it. It's the same thing like the Toyota production system and other sort of lean practices. It's not that intuitive, but when it's applied, all the incremental value and all the learnings and that fast feedback loop, strong feedback loops drive amazing outcomes, and fast fashion has taken over the planet, and it's spread to other industries and other practices. And it's essentially a lean, agile practice where you keep removing waste, you keep focusing on to the end-to-end process, fixing decision-making bottlenecks, and allowing for sort of rapid innovation, rapid learning, and rapid turnaround. You know, the lean startup space, it's the same approach to how you build a startup. Rather than building everything and trying to get it all right, why not take that approach? And so you can think of the startup methodology today as being like fast fashion. You're trying to build things that people want to buy, and you're trying to do that without talking to them. It's sort of been proven absurd. That's what fast fashion fixes. That's what lean startup fixes. And that's what we need to do with lean e-commerce practices. So you can think of it like a lean startup equals fast fashion equals lean e-commerce. And now we're going to go and talk about some of the specifics about how you can achieve these kind of practices in your large or your small e-commerce initiatives. The future of customer experience is omnichannel and evergreen. This is what everyone's trying to do. They're trying to build customer experiences, get content, get messaging, get user experiences, and manage them across multiple channels. and they're trying to innovate and improve them, but they're doing it on a multi-year cycle, which if you think about the pace of innovation and you think about users actually enjoying an experience, I mean, we've proven that that's not effective. We've proven in retail that an 18-month cycle from concept to store, that seasonal line planning doesn't work, that your merchandising strategies have to be lean. Same thing. So we want omnichannel, and we want to be able to keep it up to date all the time. In a traditional e-commerce project, you have months of development with complex back-end logic, weeks of testing and staging, and testing environments that don't include real data, don't mirror production, and you end up with an all-hands-on-deck deployment that is a white-knuckle odyssey. It is quite something. And what do we do when this kind of stuff happens? Well, we end up with a system that performs very similar to our last one, and we start over. And because it's such a difficult thing to do, and it was such a painful process, and we had so many issues trying to go to production, rather than speeding up, we actually slow down. We get more scared. We become risk averse, and as a result, it gets worse. Because ultimately, the longer you wait before shipping something, the more complex it is. So you're not actually benefiting from waiting longer. The quicker your turnaround, the less risk, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but there's less risk to getting it wrong. So this is just not the way we want to build software. But operationally, and from a design process, and from a governance and organizational and who we talk to, we don't know how to sort of fix that. So we stay stuck in this mode, and fear keeps us there. With lean e-commerce, let's look at what a lean e-commerce deploy might look like, and then we'll talk about how to get there. Days of development with no or minimal back-end logic, especially with HTML5 single-page applications. What that means is we're building stuff that's actually going on the channel. It's going into the web. It's going into the mobile. It's going into the kiosk, in the in-store display. There is no need to change the back-end. The back-end is a platform. It's servicing the customer experience. We can build multiple customer experiences. We can deploy them quickly. We can change them. We can extend them. Now, obviously, there is ongoing back-end development, and that can run in its own sort of flow. But for the most part, we don't have that strong coupling. We can move a lot faster. Sort of like your store, right? You can rearrange your store without actually having to change your products. Or you can bring in a bit of new product without having to get rid of the old product. You have hours of testing instead of weeks in dev and staging. It still doesn't include real data. It doesn't mirror production. But it's such a smaller unit that when you go to push it live, you vet it, learn about it, and you roll it back or you fix it very quickly. And most good e-commerce architectures allow you to run it with a few users with a segmented deployment. So what happens now is that you're not scared to deploy it. You don't have to wait longer. You don't have to have as many approvals. And the shorter your turnaround, the less risk. It's actually there's like a threshold that if you go past, say, a month, now your risk is high. You may as well wait. But if you're shipping on a daily or a weekly basis, that is a completely different risk profile. Your developers can actually do the deployment with automation, providing feedback on any additions, and the ability to test with only some users and roll back as needed. And then this is where you're now getting into the organizational side of things and also the process side. You're automating these things. You're removing waste. You're working on the value stream. This is your supply chain. So if you think of fast fashion and how we're optimizing the supply chain, reinventing the supply chain, working at our partnerships, getting vendors who can work in a fast fashion supply chain. Those are massive undertakings. North American retailers were a decade behind European ones because of the distance between them and the supply chain, and it took them longer to get that worked out. They've got it now, though, and there's no going back. Similar thing with lean e-commerce. And then finally, analytics and user feedback inform future development. So these are your store numbers. This is your sell rate. This is what people are buying. This is the same thing now from your lean e-commerce deploy. You've added a user feedback mechanism. You've added a new way of looking at artwork. You've added different features, and you know immediately what's happening. You've tried a new channel. You're pushing it through an in-store kiosk. You're trying an experiment to see if someone in store sees something that sort of brings them to explore the product on their phone. Is it going to convert them? If someone comes in the store and they can pick up some data on something they're interested in, is that going to help convert them in the future? Can they see something that's more experiential surrounding product? Logistically, in the past, that would have been a nightmare because you're in a fast fashion sort of supply chain. You have product coming into the company, into the store. Now, how are you going to actually coordinate the customer experience across all these channels? you need to be able to do this on a real-time basis and constantly test and evolve and learn to have the most impressive impact. And so we have mobile user experience, customer experience, omni-channel, and why now? Competitive business landscape, it's table stakes. Mobile web are driving the end-to-end customer experience. It's there and it's growing. So most retailers that I talk to have more than 50% of their traffic and their interactions on mobile now. But if you don't do it quickly, you build the wrong thing. You're trying to solve something for something that didn't exist 2 years ago, and your planning and development process is going to have you solving it 2 years from now, and by that time things would have changed. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mike, and Mike is going to talk about actually how do we get this done? How do we work in this manner?
So thank you, Nick. So I have these two images on here as kind of counterpoints to what is really pushing for customer experience in the retail space. Amazon, as everyone knows, and I think Apple in light of the Apple Store and what they're doing there, and how that's affecting how people think of an internal shopping experience. So Amazon, I think the main point of focus there is that they are pushing code and changes to segments of their user base, and that happens to be a very large segment, even if it's small for them. And they're testing and experimenting always and trying to squeeze as much conversion as they can out of the shopping experience online. And they're able to do this because of the technical infrastructure they have, because of the organizational infrastructure they have, and how they structure their teams and allow their teams to do this lean startup, build, measure, learn process, where they have take insight and turn it into action. Apple, on the other hand, is applying these kinds of principles to their in-store experience. So Apple stores have no lineups. They have employees that they are actually referred to as geniuses. And so you have this remodeling of the customer experience in a key pain point of retail, which is lineups. And then you have an elevation of the service, the person doing the service or working for the retailer, and that they are literally referred to as geniuses. So you're elevating kind of both people within that customer experience. So the person doing the servicing feels better about their role in that, and they have a lot of autonomy to operate and fix the customer's pain point, and the customer basic pain point of not wanting to sit in line and be attended to as quickly as possible to solve it. So those are just two kind of applications of the same logic that we've seen. So what happens when you start to do lean, agile development is that alignment becomes exceptionally crucial because you're moving so fast, because speed is of the essence. You need alignment and a lot of context sharing to happen at the beginning of the project. And if it doesn't, then things go off track really quickly, more quickly than it would in a typical waterfall situation. So you have to be prepared for that. You need shared understanding, and this is hard to get. You need to the understanding diverges over time, which is what I was speaking about. If you don't have that alignment at the beginning, you will quickly find that you will become more and more unaligned. In a lean, agile space, that happens even faster. We can only truly understand the user in action, not at design time. So we need to launch to our users. Everything before that is a hypothesis on what we think a good solution is. And until we launch, until we go live, that hypothesis has not been proven or disproven. So if we start to treat everything like that, our desire to want to go live and launch becomes greater, and we're less afraid of doing that because we will learn faster. And then again, segmenting that to a smaller user set, learning from that, and then rolling that out and expanding that over time is a very useful way of going about that. So just to get back to project alignment, we've seen this many times on our projects very early on when we were starting to learn about a lean and agile ourselves and how we would apply that to development and design. We had a lot of situations occur like this, where everyone had a sense of where they wanted to go. We have a CEO, a CTO, and the rest of the team. There wasn't alignment about what they actually wanted to do. And then not only that, they actually had slightly different trajectories about where they wanted to go. And this was because they didn't have shared context. And I've talked to many people in other organizations, and this is like a systematic problem. And it's actually very easily solved with a focused discovery process. And we've seen that pay huge dividends here. So as you can see, over time, you just get farther away. So you start unaligned, and then over time, you get farther away. And by the time you realize that, weeks or months could go by, and then it's very hard to navigate back or even to assess what was the root cause of that misalignment. So if you align on where you are and what you know as far as context goes, over time you can still become unaligned, but it will be to a degree that's manageable. But then if we align on where we want to go as well and what are the outcomes we want to see, then we're always staying aligned, or there's very little variance over time of that alignment. And this is what we call the BML team, which is build, measure, learn, which is lean principles applied to product development. So how do we do it? Lean e-commerce, there's strategy, clarity with the kickoff and discovery. We call this clarity canvas process. It's a very simple process that we facilitate with our clients to get that alignment and clarity. It's based on the idea of a business model canvas and some design thinking principles. And then we use story mapping as a way of an agile product management solution. So we have a view of, we have the 30,000-foot view of the roadmap that is agile, and we can adjust as our learnings come through. Design and delivery of a feature in a release stream, and the validation. So validation is important. Like I said, everything is a hypothesis until we put it in front of our end users and we see real feedback. And in retail, that means we make more money than we did before because more people are happy and they're buying more things and they're not getting blocked by a bad UX. So the core organizational competencies for lean e-commerce. End-to-end collaboration from stakeholders through to customers. So this is that logic of always having the customer in mind. These are the lean UX and lean startup principles. We focus from the customer, we bring them into the process, we're getting feedback from them really quickly, we're pushing that feedback across the team, and this includes stakeholders. So everyone learns and keeps that context shared. Lean, agile principles, I believe, are really focused on a quality of communication. So high quality of communication is absolutely fundamental. And what we've seen in organizations that try to apply lean and agile principles is they often think that this is something that they can isolate to just the developers. And what happens when the development team starts to work in this way, it starts to show the cracks in the communication within the organization, and then you get into starting to think about how you can improve those, and those get into that starts to quickly lead into how do we start to shift our organization to allow this process to happen more easily. And then again, by having the context, you actually have autonomy of decision making. So developers are no longer just handed designs without the context. The whole team is working within the shared context. Everyone is making better decisions, which actually reduce your bottom line, make projects go faster, and have better outcomes. And the feedback loop enables everyone to be comfortable with the new speed and decision making. So there's a part of building muscle memory within this. So it's like exercising. At first, your muscles are in a lot of pain, and you're not sure how or why, or even if you want to keep doing this. But over time, your body starts to change. You start to get better. You start to see results, and it just becomes a natural part of your everyday. And all of this enables this omni-channel and evergreen approach. This is the lean house as defined by the Toyota production model system, which is kind of the godfather of everything we're talking about here applied in manufacturing. A lot of companies then and now in North America applied the idea of just in time, so low overhead on their stock, quick turnaround time, low inventory, reducing costs generally. That is one principle of the lean house. The other one is Jiroka, which is about again, that's where you're pushing decision making down, where someone on the line can actually stop the whole production line, because that's the best way to find the root cause of the problem, fix that problem, and continually improve. And this plays out in how we build software, but also how we design the customer experience. And it's a very powerful, and as you can see in this diagram, essential part of lean. So lean principles. Small units of work, this is crucial. This relates to small experiments, small stories, doing little things that can have really big impact and doing them sooner rather than later, not waiting to launch. Again, short cycle time. We found that cycle time is a really good indicator of how healthy a project is, and just reducing cycle time can have massive impact on how you deliver. Low inventory. I guess this applies to the logic of not having too much work in production at any one time. So if the team gets too distracted and there's a lot of context switching, this can actually slow things down dramatically, and it's natural for the team to jump on to new things to do if someone gets blocked. We found that actually having the team rally around and fix that thing, and again, get stories done, get bits of work done and complete is crucial, because if you start to increase your inventory around your work in production, the context switching can be a real killer, and it's a hard thing to analyze, but it really does dramatically slow things down and hurts the team.
Just add on the low inventory as well, just from a requirements, documentation, design, that the more you have a huge investment in something that's losing value rapidly. So if you spend 6 months in the design process and you have teams of like 30 people working on it, subject matter experts, you've built up this inventory, and that inventory is losing value almost as fast as you create it. And now it's actually still sitting there longer while you start doing the build. It's just just from a pure logic sort of meaning perspective, and the industry changes, and who captured that information, you want to minimize that additionally.
And I guess the point is that these are principles, and you can apply them to different aspects of within your own company and its organization, and actually how you deliver and design software. So low inventory as a principle is actually very valuable. And then just-in-time delivery. So delivering the right thing at the right time. How do you do that? You do that through a tight feedback loop, through experimentation, and validating that experimentation. And again, like I said, fixing problems at the root. So if you have a command and control structure where all the ability to assess and act on problems is placed at someone higher up, and most often outside of the team, it becomes almost impossible to fix those problems at the root. So you never actually reveal the problems that are causing you to have a slowdown with your delivery, with your design, with your organizational structure. So we need to extend this from development to design. Again, shared context, having a strategy that we align on, and keeping that strategy malleable. So there's the idea of emergent strategy. So how do we adjust to these things that we are learning, and how do we apply that to strategy? How do we start with clarity at the beginning of a project so we don't lose focus, we don't lose alignment, and the team feels good about the direction they're going and doesn't have someone come in later and say, why are we doing this? Everyone knows why. Again, the merge of design and delivery and having that being an integrated system is absolutely crucial. We can't hand design over the fence anymore. That classic agency advertising model does not work when you're developing products, and I think this is actually a very key point in that people see websites and web apps in the same light if they're not, in the technical world all the time. And websites and web apps are actually radically different things. In the past, a website and print ads were very similar in how they operated. They were a way to convey content to an end customer and quickly turned into a way for them to be advertised and marketed to, where an app is a tool that they use to achieve a goal. And those are radically different ways of designing. The one is, again, legacy advertising, marketing, very related to that. You can have an agency build a website that converts and markets really well. It's very hard to have an agency understand systems and complex systems and product development without being in that day in and day out and having a close tie-in relationship to delivery. So in Rangle, our design team is actually would probably be considered front-end developers in a lot of organizations. We own the CSS and the logic and how the rules of that are applied, and we work with the delivery team hand in hand. There's no separation between the two of us. And then again, validating everything and using analytics not as a way of having historical reports to make everyone feel good about the direction they're going in, but having them be real time and then looping them very quickly into new features, new changes to the software to have a better experience for the customer, which should lead to better outcomes for your bottom line. So this is an overview of our kickoff process. So all of this happens generally within 2 to 3 days, with a loop happening at the end where we go from the story mapping process into the backlog, which is the work we do in our sprints, in our small iterations of work. And I will talk about the Clarity Canvas kickoff process first. So Clarity Canvas is the structure is we ask about the project goals. This seems very basic, but over and over again, we have clients come to us and we realize that key stakeholders, from the CEO down to the product owner, down to the product manager and the lead technical person, actually don't align on what the goal of the project is. So getting alignment on the goals of the project and then prioritizing those goals is a way for us to systematically work through them and have alignment. Again, focusing from delivering software by a specific date to achieving outcomes, and we need data and KPIs to actually understand how the things we're doing are affecting the end result and the outcomes, and are we getting the outcomes we want. Key users and stakeholders, target users and key stakeholders. So this is a way for us to identify who do we care about, why, who is the person we're building this thing for, what do we know about them. So this is where someone who deals in the customer service department can be hugely valuable, because they are fielding all the complaints and they're dealing with customers on the day-to-day. So we found them a very useful person to have in this part of the discussion. And are there any key stakeholders that we haven't identified that actually should be in this room at the time, and how do we flag that as something we should address sooner rather than later? So we don't have them coming in and because their voice and their context wasn't heard, the project goes in a direction that wasn't intended. So whose goals and concerns do we need to address to make this project successful? These are the key questions that we ask at each point in the Clarity Canvas. And then we take the most important goal for the most important user, and we map that for a journey for that user across the whole experience, where our software solution is generally one part of that whole experience. And then we figure out ways of how do we identify pain points that we can address and the software can address. And then we prioritize all of that, and let's address the most valuable thing we can do with the least amount of effort and try to get that into production faster, so we're getting a much faster ROI on the things we're doing. And then again, risky assumptions is what are the things that could happen that could actually sink this project, that we need to address now and surface and get clarity on, that hasn't happened within the time boxed session that we're having at this point. So this is kind of a holding place for any of those unknown questions that cannot be answered by the people in the room, or unknowns that we don't know about our user. So if we have an idea of our user, but there's a part of their experience that we're not clear on, that could be a risky assumption if we make a bunch of things to address a problem they don't actually have. So finding out the user's actual problem and validating that's important. You can read more about this at this URL, blog.rangle.io/clarity-canvas. We're starting to write a lot about our process, how it works here at Rangle in detail. We'll be following this up very shortly with a post about facilitating this process as well, so there's a lot more information. Again, what this leads to is there's something really interesting that happens when you visualize and put your idea of a solution on a wall for everyone to see. So it's very easy to spend a lot of time brainstorming and talking about solutions and talking about ideas and feeling like you had a lot of alignment just because you talked about those things. The minute you put those things up on a wall and really start to dig in and examine them, you realize that everyone actually had a slightly different idea of what they meant, and they weren't conveying it very accurately because words are really hard. And when you have a bunch of people in the room, often one person, usually me actually, can dominate a conversation. So we use a design thinking principle, which is called note and vote, where we have that question that we ask for each section, and we tell everyone on a sticky note to write down how they would address that question or what are their thoughts around that question. So we're looking for a lot of quantity, and then we map all that quantity into like-minded things, and then again prioritize those things and have more discussions to dig through and get alignment on all that stuff, and we do that for each section. So this is just kind of visual representation of that. And then I think in the end, the combined output is actually more than the sum of its parts. So there's a lot of value in that as well. Everyone's an expert in their own little thing, and let's come together and make something exceptional through that. And then we get into the story mapping process. So this is how we do agile product management at Rangle at the moment. And this takes the user journey, so you're staying user focused, you're focusing on the customer, and then you're mapping your work and slicing out releases that will add value to that customer's experience incrementally over time. And this gives everyone a view into that, so you can have stakeholders that are actually not directly involved in the project look at the story map and be able to understand what's happening, what's been done, and what needs to be done, and does anything need to be rearranged and what needs to be done based on new information that they have or the team has. So this allows us to make changes to the roadmap in an agile way, which affects the strategy. So these things are all related. And this is just a kind of visual example of how that would be represented with activities focused on the backbone. So we want to organize email. There's steps in organizing email. We search for email. We have files of emails, and that is the walking skeleton. That's the user journey. Those are the things that we discover in Clarity Canvas, and then we start to create stories, which is the work to be done as a team to facilitate those things and slice out releases across entire flows. So we're not focused on just building one page and then another page and then another page. We're focused on building experiences that deliver value in the most valuable experience earlier, and then releasing that and getting feedback on that to see if we're right. And I'll hand it back to Nick for the technical.
All right, so thanks, Mike. That was great. So that was a great overview. So what we've talked about is how we're moving towards a lean e-commerce process, how we can do that. Mike did a great breakdown of how we can work in the design and the planning process, that we can get these threads now that we can work in a continuous delivery model. There's some other technical considerations that have a big impact on this as well. So there's some core technical competencies for lean e-commerce, and some of them are data-driven decision making. That's pretty much a given, but it's amazing how many people struggle with this, and you need to have the right platform and the right loops to be able to drive that. A second, decoupling the front end and the back end, because when you're talking about lean e-commerce and we're talking about customer experience, it is truly omnichannel and it is evergreen. And if you're trying to change too much in your system, that becomes really difficult to do. So when you decouple the front end and the back end, which has happened with modern web browsers and HTML5, you're actually allowing your customer experience to be developed and to live independent of the transactions and sort of the things that aren't really that customer facing. It's the platform and the experience. And that has a massive impact on being able to architect and run these lean e-commerce development flows, design and development flows. A common technical UI approach that supports all channels. If you think about trying to do this omnichannel, lean, evergreen, across multiple channels in coordination with a lot of other business functions such as photo shoots and product planning and the supply chain logistics, you do need a common technical user interface approach that supports all the channels, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to do it. And so that's where JavaScript and modern web development frameworks come into play. You can create an omnichannel code base and you can distribute that through all of your channels. Finally, you need something you can trust. You need a platform, you need a code base, you need clean code, you need really, really focused software engineering practices, you need deep testing, you need things that can change quickly and support multiple needs. Imagine if you think about a store and you could rearrange the store to bring in new product. The store design has been proven to drive so much of the user experience and year-over-year sales within a store. Keeping users engaged, or you weren't able to change your products because you weren't able to rework your manufacturing line. You weren't able to get the fabric and cut it a different way. That's sort of the way we treat software, like we're doing it once and it's going to be there forever, and we're not able to change it. We need to have that flexibility, that same flexibility that exists all the way up and down our supply chain. That's what clean code, that's what good software engineering, that's what engaged cross-functional teams create. And finally, you need a work definition process that supports learning and change, and I think Mike did a great overview of that, but it's really important to think of that as also it's a technical competency, that you have cross-functional teams that can work in that context. Why now, I guess from a technical perspective, these things would have been extremely hard to do with prior generations of technology. If you're building an iOS app, you're building an Android app, you're building a web, you're building mobile web, you're building something for the kiosk, you're using Flash. It's just an overwhelming amount of complexity, but HTML5 has really changed that. And this really started in the late 2012, early 2013, where HTML5 crossed 90-95% of all devices, all channels, and that's what's really enabled this omnichannel code base. We've also had the spread of lean spread throughout industry. So we had agile take off, but then lean principles have also, which are very aligned, have also really started to take off, and the application of those to lean startup and business development and fast fashion, which actually started way before this. These are all really driving a radically different way of building e-commerce experiences and managing them. And for a wrap up, 5 key takeaways, sort of recapping some of the things that we've talked about. Split your IT into the experience and the platform, front end and back end. This has a massive impact. And companies are starting to see this, and IT technology vendors are starting to see this. So we're seeing with Drupal and WordPress, We're seeing headless versions where it's an API that you build the experience against. There's been a deep learning that most CMS platforms, everything they try to do to make your development easier makes your ability to create a good customer experience worse, because they're just putting in really old templating languages. They're invading your brand, they're invading your design, they're making it harder to change in the future, they're making it harder to adapt. So really working off of e-commerce platforms that really are providing service as an API, an application programming interface, and you're building your customer experience in your own well-engineered solution stack. You need to enable continuous delivery of new experiences across all channels. You need that omni-channel and evergreen approach. This is exactly the same as fast fashion, store design, supply chain management. You need that for your customer experience. You need that in your digital sort of delivery. This demands an organization structured around continuous delivery. This is by far the hardest point. Mike talked well to that. You're having decision making deeper in the organization. You're really working on collaboration. You're unifying people's outlooks. But there's an amazing thing that the faster you move, the easier this gets. And that is a bit counterintuitive. We often think that the more planning we do, the better the communication, because we're just going to define it all up. We're going to up front. We're going to explain it. We're going to document it. That fails. We know that fails. People have different perceptions. Those age. That's inventory. When you're working on smaller things, moving it faster, an executive sees it, the designer sees it, the developer sees it, and the user sees it all within a week. If there is any misalignment, the measurement and learning from that now gets communicated back across that team. They stay in alignment, and we have a better shared context, shared learning, and the user is a participant in that discussion as much as the stakeholder. Everybody's happy, everyone's doing better work, everyone's more engaged. And this, in turn, does require an integrated design and delivery process. And this is the biggest, most frustrating thing that we see in the industry. So companies are very keen to do agile, they're very keen to do lean, and then they wonder why it doesn't really work. And they only do it from a development point of view. They don't do it from a design point of view, because it's like that sort of want to plan it all out, to figure it out, to define it, and then do it. But that doesn't work. That was exactly like we were doing line planning and merchandising, 20 years ago. And fast fashion just blew that out of the water. We need to take those principles and push them through design. We've got to change the way that we work from an organizational perspective, from a management perspective, a design perspective, and move towards this lean e-commerce model. It's the only way that you're going to actually drive the massive improvements in customer experience that are going to really drive the business outcomes that you want. One way of thinking of it is design cycle time. So you have a lean startup approach, and you build, measure, and learn. How fast can you do that? And you need to structure around this build, measure, learn process so that you are learning. If you remove the learning, people just build and they measure, but the measurement doesn't mean anything, and they just build more, and you're not closing that loop, which means now that the executives and the designers aren't really getting feedback. We no longer have that conversation. We never have that. We don't have that alignment. Even though we're working on a short cycle time, that feedback loop has got to be there. And with all of this, what you're really doing is ensuring that the cost of failure in your process is way less than the value of learning. And this enables radical innovation. So if I'm running a e-commerce project and something gets built and there was a little bit of a misalignment, but it was 2 days of work and the user gave feedback that it wasn't good, or the designer reviewed the end result, or an executive saw it in a review meeting, the cost of failure is almost nothing. And that's going to happen rarely. And so there's very, very little risk and very, very little cost of failure in a lean, sort of low cycle time process. The value you get, though, is immeasurable. And you get the communication, the collaboration, the learning, and the ability to actually drive omnichannel initiatives that are going to have bigger impacts. And then just for a last slide, 5 key strategies and tools. So things to make this maybe a little more concrete if you're thinking that sounds great, but how do we do that? Talked about HTML5, that's modern JavaScript. That's Angular 2, React, Ember, this allows you to build applications that can go and run anywhere. And when you've decoupled the experience from the platform, from the transactions, this becomes incredibly powerful because I can change a customer experience and I don't even have to talk to the people in the IT department because I'm not changing the way something's being checked out. I'm changing the way that it's being represented. A continuous delivery pipeline to allow omnichannel evergreen feature delivery. That's a long sentence, but what continuous delivery pipelines are continuous integration servers that take code and basically have you go from design to development to it being completed through this continuous pipeline that ensures that everybody's working together, it's measurable, and it's getting done, and everything keeps moving forward. It's your value stream in a manufacturing facility. This brings everything together. If there's one thing that will make this work, it's a continuous delivery pipeline, because when you start having issues from a design process, a development process, a QA process, a user process, this links it all together and makes sure everything's moving quickly with that short cycle time so that you're not losing that ability to talk about what you've just done. There's a lot more to this. Could go on for days, but when you start talking about how you do design, you're not building the high fidelity mock-ups that you're giving to developers. You're not prescriptively doing that. What you're doing is you're doing the UX strategy, getting pointed in the right direction, taking a lean user experience approach, doing the clarity canvas, story mapping, getting stuff built, doing build, measure, learn, and that's rolling right back through this process in our iterative approach. These are well-developed practices now. They've been around for a while, but they're not applied appropriately in larger projects because as soon as we get into larger projects, our fear makes us do things differently. And that makes us do bigger designs, bigger budgets, and that makes it much harder to communicate. And what happens then is people can't decide anymore. They can't make decisions. They're disengaged. This is all well understood. All of this is well understood. All of this can be done by any organization. There's great practices in all these areas. It's a question of just getting the right organizational structure in place. That's the hard bit, but it's doable. Lots of companies do it, and with the right help, any company can get here, and the value is incredible. You need cross-functional teams, and cross-functionality, people are always for it, and then they don't do it. You need cross-functional delivery teams. You need designers, developers, QA, product owners, stakeholders, users, whatever you need. They've got to be working together, talking about what they're doing right now. And that becomes difficult because, we needed to really figure out what we're going to do, so we did all the design up front. So we don't need a designer on the delivery team. They're just going to implement it. And we're pretty sure we've got a good design. Well, you don't. You don't have a good design. It's not going to be the best design. And it's going to also be hard for the developers to add their value. And as soon as you start getting measurement and you start finding what is really the highest value features, you're not going to be able to shift because you're constrained by the high fidelity design. You need to design in a different way. You need to have design on the team working together. It's not that hard to do. You just have to shift the practices. You have to have the continuous delivery pipeline. You need to have that separation of the experience and the platform, and you need to bring in some new tools, and this works extremely well. And then you just got to move fast. I mean, not too fast, but fast, which is a lot faster than most companies realize. Ship fast, learn fast. This unifies the organization. This drives learning. This eliminates waste. This forces that continuous improvement process where things do break, we learn quick, and then we fix it, and we keep moving on. This is so fundamentally valuable for companies to do better, build better, have a better experience. And to top it all off, when you work in this kind of model, you eliminate so much waste. Your actual costs for building large, complex systems is a lot cheaper. So not only are you building a better system, you're building it with a lot more value, and you're building it faster, and you're removing a lot of the waste that you would have had, like the inventory and the things that you don't build, or building the wrong thing, or building things that are sort of okay but actually aren't that valuable that you could have just skipped over, got to market faster, and build something better. And so that's the talk. So we appreciate you joining us today. If you have any questions, we can look to the question area, and if not, please share this video once it gets shared after a few days. And please give us a call if you have any questions. You can email us at info@Rangle.io, find us on Twitter, or even call us with that thing that's called a phone.